Oh, thank you. Yes, we haven't even started yet, but I appreciate the enthusiasm. So welcome and thank you for joining us at the Fairfield Area Chamber of Commerce Candidate Forum sponsored by Freeman Cavanides Law Firm. Tonight we will have candidates vying for 3 different seats in the Iowa legislature, sharing with us their vision for Iowa and their thoughts on the issues. So in just a few short minutes, we will welcome Representative Jeff Shipley and candidate Mike Heaton to the stage, which they're already here, we're ahead of schedule. They are running for House District 87. And then at 6:30, we will welcome candidates Helena Hayes and Lisa Ossian. They're running for House District 79. And then at 7:30, we will welcome Senator Adrian Dickey and former Senator Rich Taylor. They're running for Senate District 44. So just a few notes before we get the forum underway. So all of our questions today were submitted by chamber members and members of the public. We received an overwhelming amount of questions, and so not every question will be able to be answered tonight. Members of the chamber board and chamber staff reviewed these submitted questions and have edited them for clarity, brevity, and understanding, and we will not be taking any live questions from the audience tonight. I also ask that our audience refrain from applause or loud noises during our question and answer period, as we have limited time with each candidate and we need to devote as much time as possible to the issues at hand. And so now to get down for the rules of our forum. Each forum will last 1 hour and we'll begin with candidate introductions and bios. All bios were provided by the candidates. Candidates will have 4 minutes at the beginning of the forum for opening remarks. For our question and answer period, each candidate will have up to 4 minutes for their response. And at the end of each forum, the candidates will have 4 minutes for closing remarks. We will be keeping a strict time limit in place and ask the candidates to please be mindful of their time. We have a friendly volunteer right at that corner with yellow and red cards. The yellow card indicates 1 minute of your time remaining, and the red card is 30 seconds. When your time is up, I will ask you to stop, and I would highly encourage you guys to do so. Alrighty, and so those are the rules, and so we will get over to our bios for our candidates this evening. Representative Jeff Shipley. So, in 4 years, Jeff Shipley has distinguished himself as one of Iowa's leading experts in constitutional law, civil rights, public health policy, and a key ally of Governor Kim Reynolds' education agenda. His major legislative accomplishments include keeping children in school and prioritizing their health, protecting children from unnecessary mask mandates, preserving medical freedom in the workplace, Iowa's largest tax cut, eliminating tax on retirement income, respecting women's athletics, and most importantly, willing to stand on principle and force tough votes, even when it's not popular with his party leadership. Jeff lives in Van Buren County. Before politics, he studied bankruptcy law and helped build an award-winning solar energy company. Jeff enjoys singing at church, riding ragbri, eating sauerkraut, mushroom hunting, and telling jokes. His Southeast Iowa roots go back 5 generations, and he is honored to serve the state he loves so much. Please welcome Representative Jeff Shipley. And we also have candidate Mike Heaton. Mike has over 2.5 decades of experience in nonprofit management and development. A graduate of Mount Pleasant High School, Mike earned his bachelor's degree from the University of Iowa and his master's degree in nonprofit management from Regis University. He has over 2.5 decades of experience. Oh, I already read that. He has decades of experience with organizations around the globe, including Catholic Charities, UNICEF USA, and Iowa Wesleyan University. Currently, Mike is the founder and owner of a co-working and entrepreneurship center in Mount Pleasant called Traction STEAM. He serves on the board of the Old Threshers Foundation and was a founding board member of Fields of Dreams Uganda and PFLAG Mount Pleasant. He has served as an elementary school PTA president, Rotarian, and YMCA basketball coach. Mike regularly volunteers with Old Threshers, Midwest Central Railroad, and the Mount Pleasant Music Department. Mike, his wife Abigail, and their 2 teenagers live in Mount Pleasant. Please welcome candidate Mike Heaton. Right, and we will begin with opening remarks, and I will have Jeff start first, and then we will rotate back and forth of who starts first for the subsequent questions. Representative, please go ahead.
Well, thank you, Ian. Thank you to the Fairfield Chamber of Commerce and everyone for coming out this evening. The Fairfield Chamber has done a great job for many years in providing this opportunity for us to engage in the process, so it's wonderful to see a great turnout tonight. It has been my honor serving this community in the Iowa House for the last 4 years. As everyone knows, the last 4 years have had a lot of unexpected challenges, and certainly it's been a learning and growing process for, I think, everyone, and I think we have a long way to go. I sometimes struggle to find the right words to convey just how serious some of these issues are, and that what we'll be discussing tonight is certainly much more severe and stressful than what we were talking about and debating back in 2018 or even in 2020 in some instances. The world is changing quick, and we have a lot of work to do to keep up. So my name is Jeff Shipley. I'm running for office to protect freedom. I know that means a lot of different things to different people, but one thing I hope it means to everyone is that if you're blessed to live in Iowa, from the very beginning, the state was founded in freedom. That if you're between the Mississippi and the Missouri River, your life, your liberty, your happiness of you and your family will be cherished, respected, and protected here. That's been what our state has done from the very beginning on extremely difficult issues that tore our nation apart, such as slavery. And it is that legacy of freedom and civil rights that I hope myself and the Republican Party can continue to uphold in this state. Who are we protecting our freedom from? Well, the biggest thing I've had to work on in the last few years is protecting Iowans from Joe Biden's mandates. Last year, we spent a lot of time visiting hospitals all across Iowa, having healthcare workers who were facing corporate or government vaccine mandates, people who wish to maintain their religious status or their medical freedom in the workplace, and we had to protest. We had to fight for that right, and we had to fight to keep nurses and doctors on the job. That took up a lot of time. Now, this year, we have new federal rules coming down from the Department of Education that will instill gender identity instruction in classrooms all over the country as young as kindergarten. And just to back up a little bit, probably one of the, I don't want to say joyful, but one of the most fulfilling experience of working was when the OSHA mandate was being discussed, and I get calls from the Van Buren and the Davis County school boards. They say, hey, our school board lawyer is telling us to implement this policy. If we do that, we're not going to have staff to be able to get the kids to school. We have bus drivers that will not come up to work if we try to enforce Joe Biden's mandate. So please, Representative Shipley, can you come to our school board and can you help us? And thankfully, those school boards, they weren't afraid. They weren't, because that was the thing. Joe Biden's going to come in and ding you $17,000 every time for an infraction. And thankfully, the state of Iowa was able to protect those institutions. And now that we have a big thing with the new gender identity rules, which will create a very big conflict with the law we passed to protect women's sports. And when I'm going door to door, a lot of people are very confused on the discussion. We do have a crisis of identity in this nation. What does it mean to be an American? What does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a woman? These are questions that people are struggling to find answers to. And if we can't have a collective shared sense of identity, it's going to make operating in society very difficult. So I hope we can really explore a lot of very important issues tonight. I'm thankful for the opportunity to be on the ballot, to be the Republican nominee, and I'm thankful for each and every one of you for helping us in this discussion because we have a lot of serious challenges, and I hope we can all work together. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Mike, you're up.
Yeah. I'm going to go and stay back here because these mics aren't really designed for walking around, so I apologize. Thank you to the Chamber for putting this event on tonight. The Chamber, as Jeff mentioned, is incredibly important to our communities, something I have a strong love for in general with my passions in economic development. Thank you to everybody here for showing up. There's a quote I love. There's actually quite a few quotes I love. One of them being, democracy dies in darkness. Another being, if you don't do politics, politics will do you. And one of my favorite quotes is, if you want a seat at the table, you have to show up. And it is wonderful and inspiring to see so many people showing up tonight to have a seat at the table. Whether or not you agree with me or you would disagree with me as we go throughout the course of the night, I respect you for being here and having your voice being heard and listening to the two of us as we talk about our similarities and differences. That said, there's one thing I hope that you remember about me when you walk out the door today, and that's that I have your back. As your state representative, I consider you my family. Speaking of family, when I was getting married, we had a wedding registry. And the day after our wedding, we started opening presents and get wedding gifts and stuff. And we weren't too surprised to open up a casserole dish. Corningware, you guys we're all from the Midwest. We all know what Corningware is, right? We were surprised to open up Corningware number 2 through 12. Because we didn't register for 12 sets of Corningware. And we were a little surprised that we got them. I thought maybe something was wrong with the registry. Turns out it wasn't. And it wasn't for about 8 years until I realized the significance of getting all those sets of casserole dishes. In 2011, my mom passed away of cancer. And we were very, very fortunate to be able to spend that time in home as she went through hospice at home during her final week. And I got to come home and sit by her bedside. And at one point in time, I made my way into the kitchen, opened up the refrigerator to get a bite to eat. And that refrigerator was stuffed full of casseroles. And we all know that feeling. We live in rural Iowa. Our communities are there for each other, always. Doesn't matter our politics, doesn't matter our religion, doesn't matter our race or our gender, doesn't matter how much money we make. When you move into a town like Fairfield, you're part of our family. I have your back, and I want you to remember that if you elect me to be your state representative, I will treat you like family. You will always have a place at the table. Whether or not we agree or not on issues, you belong. No one is left out. No one is excluded. Your voice will be heard at my table. I am looking forward to this forum, and thank you for being here tonight and being here at the table.
Thank you so much. Now I'd like to remind our audience once again to please refrain from applause or loud noises during this question and answer period that we're about to embark on, just so we can focus on the issues and get through as many questions as possible. So our first question deals with taxes. And Mike, you will be the first to respond. Sure. Corporate taxation can directly affect economic activity and investments. What changes do you see we need to make Iowa more appealing for existing businesses and for new business investments into our communities?
This is one of my biggest passions, so I'm glad we started with this. My focus isn't on out-of-date peacock feather waving attract big businesses to Iowa. That's an old school approach that we found to be somewhat detrimental to our rural communities as large companies have invested in manufacturing plants in our communities, have seen incentives, tax incentives even, to move here, given jobs, and then decided in a boardroom in Texas or in New York that it's not worth keeping those manufacturing plants here. The devastation that causes to our rural communities is epic. And we all know that because we've all experienced that. We've all seen those plants leave. All of our companies we have in Fairfield and Mount Pleasant and Keosauqua, even if they're not owned here, they are important. But to me, the tax incentives, the corporate tax, the business tax incentives that we have to be focused on entrepreneurship locally, helping our creative and talented individuals that are already here, that are graduating from our high schools, from our colleges, to start their own businesses here. Because when you start a business here and you grow a business here and you're making decisions about the future of your business, whether or not you should close, whether or not you should expand, whether or not you should change your direction, you have to look your employees in the eye on Sunday. That makes all the difference. You're not a line on the bottom of a sheet of paper. You're not a number, you're a person. We did a great job of that for years, for decades in Southeast Iowa with locally owned businesses and startups. Fairfield does an incredible job of that in general. But we can't get over-dependent on trying to peacock feather our way into new jobs. We need to help our people here grow their own businesses locally and provide tax incentives to be able to do that.
Thank you. Representative, same question. Corporate taxation can directly affect economic activity and investments. So what changes do you see we need to make Iowa more appealing for existing business and for new business investments in our community?
Thank you. Yes, so I think one of the most popular things we did this last legislative session was we began overhauling the entire tax code. And thankfully, Iowa is among the strongest fiscal positions in the entire nation where we can have a serious conversation about reducing our tax burden. I view taxes this way. In a lot of areas, we view tax as a disincentive. For instance, we'll levy a sin tax because we want to discourage a particular activity. You could look at income the same way, that the more you tax income, you're actually discouraging productive behavior. So I prefer a tax model that's focusing more on the consumption of goods and services that people have a little bit more control of. And if you eliminated the income tax entirely, I think you give people the ability to keep what they earn. I have been somewhat critical. I know the tendency is for local governments to try to attract, like I said, big name corporations into their communities by offering very aggressive property tax incentives. I don't think that's necessarily the best solution. I don't like having governments, even if it's local governments, using policy like that to pick winners and losers. But certainly a super competitive corporate tax environment. We know, we've heard it from Debbie Durham and Iowa Economic Development. We lose a lot of projects in South Dakota. And other states because of the tax reason and some of the other regulations that exist. Certificate of needs laws are often brought up when talking about healthcare investments, for instance. So I think there's a huge room for reducing taxes, getting government out of the way. And again, let us not underestimate just how debilitating it is to businesses when Joe Biden unilaterally, with no congressional action, wants to enforce a draconian mandate that would affect every employer in a particular institution. The people in our community, they're having a hard enough time with workforce as it is, and we have, frankly, it's very dictatorial, it's very authoritarian what's happening at the federal level, and it is preventing economic growth. The workforce issues are the largest thing holding back our economic prosperity, and it's definitely being exacerbated by actions taken at the federal level. We've been hearing a lot of things from across the nation about the hyper-environmental wokeism, what they're calling ESG scores, where basically you're creating financial weapons to discourage certain business and industries. So there's a lot we could do. I believe in the free market. I believe in freedom. As long as everyone's economic activity does not interfere with someone else's health and well-being, I think we can move into a more free direction, which includes lower taxes and more sensible regulation versus the completely illegitimate authoritarian dictates that we've seen from this administration. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. We'll move on to our next question, which deals with the workforce. Rural Iowa needs an increased labor pool, and workforce is a top issue for many chamber members. What do you plan to do to make Southeast Iowa a destination for a skilled workforce? Representative, we'll start with you.
Well, thank you for the question, Ian. And again, this is, we've been hearing a lot about this over the last 2 years. My understanding is this is a problem that's been developing over several decades with basically just the demographics and how families are being delayed. You have people having fewer children later in life, and you have an aging population that we're not creating enough people to sustain that. So there's a lot of talk about just demographics being the source of this. There are a lot of economic structures. I mean, I'll just get this out there. I wanted to mention this in our opening remarks. We are entering a period of great financial uncertainty. I'll quote JP Morgan Chase's Jamie Dimon. He called it a financial hurricane that could be equivalent to a superstorm Sandy. Now, obviously, that's been a long time in the making, and it's probably a bipartisan problem. But obviously, there's going to be a lot of discoordination in the marketplace. and there's a shifting economy. And we see e-commerce is a perfect example of this. There are a lot of goods and services that are being able to be provided today. Education would be included in one of these. That, again, it's been transformative, what they'd call a disruptive industry, like when I was in solar power, that you have things coming out of the market that will completely change the way we're doing things and the way we're completely changing doing business. I say the most important thing is in the public school system, ensuring that the public school system is directing towards forming strong, independently healthy identities, people who are ready to enter the workforce with the skills they need, whether it's in the industrial arts, which, again, there's a very big shortage of industrial arts teachers, so why are kids not learning the skills they need to be in the workforce? Well, because we have a shortage of teachers to teach them those skills. We have a really wonderful Indian Hill scholarship program that I love, but they're still open. There's not enough applicants who are stepping forward and acquiring these skill sets. I think one of the biggest mistakes we've made to disrupt the structure of the labor market is an over-focus on a 4-year college education at the expense of more basic life skills, whether it's basic carpentry or other things we can do. This also, incidentally, contributes to some of the housing shortage problems we have, where we have a lot of old houses because we did not learn the skills and do the things necessary to keep up and build these structures. So I think the public schools and making sure we're providing the proper curriculum to prepare students for this is going to be an essential component, and really just shifting our mindset to say, hey, we can build things, we can create, everyone can be economic empowered. And the biggest thing, we need to stop this mindset, the mindset of entitlement, of ingratitude, of victimhood, of, oh, I can just sit on the couch and play video games and collect my unemployment, and I don't need to work. That's the biggest thing we need to mention too. Iowa has a higher rate of people who are voluntarily out of the workforce because things are a little bit too comfortable and people need to get out and work. So there's a lot of dignity in it, and there's a lot of things we can do. I hope that addressed some of them. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Heaton, the same question to you. Rural Iowa needs an increased labor pool, and workforce is a top issue for many chamber members. What do you plan to do to make Southeast Iowa a destination for a skilled workforce?
$1.9 billion. That was our surplus this year, as our governor bragged about 2 weeks ago in the paper. Whole press release about it. $1.9 billion. Imagine having the gall to stand up and talk about it gives us the ability to cut taxes more and talk about the need for better employees in our school systems when we have underfunded and cut back most of our social services provided by the government over and over and over again for the last 10 years. And then to stand up and brag openly about a $1.9 billion surplus. That's our tax money. That was supposed to go to those vocational teachers. That's supposed to go to increase in wages for our teachers. That's the money that our school boards requested that our state legislature approve. It's the monies that our hospitals have requested in various funds to approve through our Health and Human Services. Stuff that the Republican legislature over and over and over again for the last decade has ignored. The reason we don't have employees here and skilled employees is because we're closing hospitals. Because our education system, which once was the best education system in the world, is now a middling in the middle in our country because we have continuously underfunded. And instead of acknowledging that that's the reason, because there is a clear, data-centric, direct correlation between underfunding our school system and the decrease in quality of our schools, instead of doing that, we're blaming people. Always blame the victim. Always blame the person sitting at home. Always blame the teachers. Always blame the healthcare professionals. They're at fault. Don't mind the fact that $1.9 billion surplus is about to be used as an excuse to continue to do tax cuts where, yeah, we're going to get another $40 in our paychecks every month. Yay. Freedom tax. Yay. Heard that one on this stage 6 months ago. The reality is people like Harry Stein is going to save $18 million. That's who's funding these pieces. That's why we can't get skilled workers in our communities, and we need to start turning that around and putting our social services, our education, and our healthcare back as a priority so we can actually get people to want to live in our rural communities.
Thank you. And again, I would like to remind the audience to refrain from applause during our question and answer period. I heard that. So our next question will go to you, Candidate Heaton. What professional and life experiences make you qualified to represent us? Push the button.
There we go. I turned it off. Sorry. So excited last time I just hit the button and turned it off. I think I'm uniquely qualified for this. I got to spend a lot of time working for an organization called UNICEF. That's the United Nations Children's Fund. A lot of people think of UNICEF as we're going to go and feed children, right? And we're going to go and help provide homes and things like that and education. But really what UNICEF does is development work. It's infrastructure. It's what systems does a community have in place everywhere in the world, including here in the US, that'll make sure that people have the ability to pursue happiness. If your sewer system's not working, you get sick. Our kids die of dehydration because of diarrhea. It's that simple. Sorry to be disgusting up here, but that's a huge thing in most developing countries if you don't have a good sewer system. If you don't have a system that allows girls to get educated, they don't go on and be successful in our communities. UNICEF did that type of work and then some, not only putting those infrastructure pieces in, but then working with local governments in those countries to make sure those laws and protections are in place, keeping kids from being forced into early marriage, keeping kids from being forced into work when they're 7 and 9 years old. Our country's not 100 years out from that here in the United States. And great legislators have stepped up. Great elected officials and community members and suffragettes have stepped up to change those laws here in the United States and to make them better. My experience with UNICEF, my experience in fundraising with nonprofits, working with community members of all levels in order to create private and public partnerships is uniquely positioned to understand what kind of laws we need, what kind of policies and programs we need in order to have a successful, healthy, and prosperous Iowa.
Thank you. Representative, the same question. What professional and life experiences make you qualified to represent us?
Thank you. Great question. I just want to start by addressing a few points my opponent made. So the last time there was a de-appropriation in education was in 2009 when Democrats were in control. And everyone remember Chet Culver's iJobs? Can anyone name a single iJobs project? No, I can't either, but we're still paying back debt from projects that nobody remembers that we paid for 10 years ago. So please don't disparage the financial health of the state of Iowa, and I would strongly encourage you maybe not be so hyperbolic in exactly what the state legislature has done and hasn't done on some of those points. I have a lot of life experiences that I could share, obviously helping individuals through bankruptcy, helping farmers make renewable energy investments that pay for themselves and help their operation long term. It has been great. I think probably personally, it's a strong conviction of faith that we wake up every morning and say, God, thank you for this day. Please make me an instrument of your peace. That's something we take seriously in this community when we talk about spiritual health and what do we mean to be individuals and children of God? What does that look like? What does it mean to be a Christian? I know it makes some people very, very uncomfortable when people talk about their purpose, their identity, and their meaning on this planet. And it's sad because it's not something everyone has. And that's why we're seeing a huge rate of depression and anxiety for people who are having identity disorders, et cetera. So I'm willing to say things that need to be said. I've been attacked as a conspiracy theorist, whatever that means. I remember when I was on the Iowa House floor, we were talking about vaccine passports. I said the key questions we need to know is, to what extent does the COVID-19 vaccine prevent infection, and to what extent does it prevent transmission of illness? Everyone thought, what's he talking about? What does he know? And then that was in April of 2021, and then Dr. Anthony Fauci and Rochelle Walensky basically revealed the same thing 5 months later on national television. Oh, it turns out it didn't prevent transmission. And that when we said, vaccinate yourself to protect others, that was a little bit of a white lie. We didn't know that. How did I know to ask those questions? Because I took the time to read the Federal Drug Administration's emergency use authorization. So I knew what had been tested for and what had not yet been scientifically discovered. I was able to identify the unknowns that were very consequential to a policy of firing employees from their job, preventing people, denying them public accommodation, denying them education. And I know you can laugh at this all you want, but there are still East Coast universities requiring masks, requiring booster shot mandates, and no, that's not supportive to my health, and I know what it means to be a healthy, independent person, and so I'm going to live in my truth. I'm going to trust what God gave me as best I can, which includes an immune system, and hopefully I can mention that on Facebook without getting censored. These are big things, and so that's what I kind of bring to the table. And when I say, oh, he's distinguished himself as an expert in constitutional law, it's because we take the time to read some of these things. Why I was able to go to the Van Buren County and Davis County School Board to ensure they didn't comply with the Biden mandate, because I took the time to read the thing. That's the level of service I'm willing to provide, and it's been an honor to serve. So I think I do have some talents. Certainly some of the votes we forced on the House floor, some of the votes I've taken that I'm sure you'd agree with, Bob, that really upset my party or the agriculture community. I know it's a big joke talking policy, but we do these things. We talk our talk, we walk our walk, and we show up for the people of Iowa.
Thank you. Our next question deals with education. Funding for public education versus private school vouchers has been a hotly contested topic at the state level for several years. What is your stance on this issue? And more broadly, how should we approach education in Iowa? Representative, we'll start with you.
So education is obviously the greatest responsibility of the state of Iowa. That's detailed in Article 9 of our state's constitution. And it is the responsibility of every adult that our number one job is to provide the happiest and healthiest environment for our children to learn and grow. Sadly, they haven't been getting that these last few years. And I've been very thankful. One of the big topics we need to address, and we probably won't get into it too deep tonight, but UNICEF has been brought up, and one of the things they've mentioned is the impact of COVID-19 on poor mental health in children and young people just being the tip of the iceberg. And this was published in October of 2021. So this is an international renowned organization, echoing other things that our Surgeon General has said and also been published, that we have a youth and adolescent mental health crisis, and it's been directly related and exacerbated by decisions that have been made in the public school system. And so again, we need the formation of healthy identities where people can be independently and strong, and they know who they are as people. And so we have chronic health issues in the schools and among children. Schools are the center of our community. We want to support them every way we can. I'm not familiar with the term voucher. That's not a term we've been using at the State House. What the governor's proposed is an education savings account, which would directly go to a parent. And the reason why this is so important, the problem that Governor Reynolds is trying to solve is that there are kids in the Des Moines public schools that have fallen drastically behind because of decisions that their superintendent and their school board have made in violation of state law. And I know this makes Democrats laugh when I say 50% of third graders in the Des Moines public schools are not reading at a proficient level, but I would encourage those Democrats to take that very seriously. That if our kids are not learning to read properly, that's going to cause a lot of problems. So what Governor Reynolds is trying to do is ensure that every kid has an equal opportunity to go to the education institution that's best for them. And there's a lot of parents. The school board situation in central Iowa has been very tense for over a year now, and it's very, very sad when in our schools people are working against each other rather than working together. And we need choices. It's taxpayer money that's going to the good of the kid. If I give someone food stamps, it doesn't matter if they spend it at the Casey's gas station or Hy-Vee or Walmart. What matters is that the food gets in the person who needs it and they can nourish themselves with the state assistance. Same thing with Medicaid. You can go to a public provider. If there's a private provider that accepts Medicaid, you can take advantage of that because the more options, the more satisfaction. One of the most frustrating things I heard from a local school board member, this was when they made a deliberate policy decision against the advice of the local health center to keep kids away from school. And the school board member I talked to said, well, we can't make everyone happy. But that doesn't mean you don't have a responsibility to do everything you can to attempt to create parent satisfaction in our community. And parents should not be yanking their kids out of school because they feel their school board isn't listening to them. So this is a very serious problem. There's a lot of money on the line. I believe the average, if you take total annual budget divided by total enrollment, you're looking at about $17,000 per pupil annually, which is a lot of money, right? So there's a lot of financial resources on the table. You guys are paying for this in your property tax. You're paying it in your sales tax. It's very, very important that these resources go to where they can get the best return on their environment, where parents are satisfied and that children are happy and healthy in an environment that works best for them. That includes individual education program, dyslexia, epilepsy, all the special needs can be accommodated for. We can create an education system that works to every student's unique need. And for the people that don't like this discussion, that don't want to improve the system, please just get out of the way and stop your disingenuous arguments.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I'm standing up for this one because this one's important to me. They're all important to me. There's so many topics here related to education. I used to lobby for the Iowa Catholic Conference. I was the voice of the school choice movement for the state of Iowa. So I understand the actual politics that happen in this issue. And so you all know we have an underfunded Des Moines school system. We talked about this earlier. When you have an underfunded Des Moines school system, you have a massive, we'll call it regentrification of downtown Des Moines. Great shopping, awesome apartments and houses. You get a lot of super wealthy people that move there. And when they move there and they look at the schools in that district that were underfunded, not only underfunded, but they already had poverty rates that are super high that we didn't provide funding to support, they get frustrated because they don't want to send their kids to those schools. And so they start lobbying the governor because they're on the fence voters. And the governor pushes for, it's not a voucher technically, but it's a voucher program. The only reason it's not a voucher is because something called the Blaine Amendment, which allows for sort of a bypass against the intent of a law that keeps public funds out of churches and that mixing of religion and politics. But the reality is this is a handful of wealthy parents in Des Moines. I don't know why we're talking about Des Moines. I want to talk about here and the impact of that program here, which is so minuscule. We have one accredited school that'll barely impact in our district right here in Fairfield. But what it's going to do, and it will take money away from our public schools, that's been verified by our legislative service agency. It'll take money away from our public schools that are already massively underfunded. And one last point. To say up here, we are giving more money than ever to public schools. $17,000, a lot of money. No, it's not. This is government dollars. Every single year, you should be increasing the amount we give to a student per student because it's something called inflation. Numbers go up, costs go up. Every year, they should be increasing it, at least by inflation. And we haven't even done that. This is all just smoke and mirrors in order to lower taxes. I said it earlier, I'll say it again, and our kids and our schools are suffering because of it, especially in our rural communities as we continue to consolidate, we continue to have more classrooms that have 30 plus kids in them, and we have massive exodus of our teachers, more so in the history of our state this year than ever before. We can't keep doing this to our parents. We can't keep doing this to our kids. We got to start putting our money where our mouth is and not just handing it back to wealthy folks across our state.
Thank you. Our next question is concerning agriculture. Iowa farmland is a valuable resource. A recent study in Successful Farming magazine showed that cover crops, tiling, and terraces were extremely beneficial ways to conserve farmland. However, these things cost farmers money, and many are not doing it. The current incentive for these is $15 per acre, up to 160 acres for cover crops. Where do you see improvement in this area, and how can we incentivize farmers to protect the land? Candidate Heaton.
This is one of those super complex issues, right? We have to protect our environment, protect our topsoil. My brother's a farmer down in Salem. I see quite a few farmers in the audience today. This is our livelihood. The idea of adding all these extra pieces to our list and to our bottom lines in terms of costs and expenses is hard to swallow. It's hard to deal with because we're already at the point with our farmers where they can barely afford to keep their farms afloat, even with second and third jobs. On the other hand, I want to go swimming in our state parks again. I want to go kayaking. I want to go hiking. I would love to have a healthier environment here in Iowa to live in every single day. I think most of us would. So what I've heard clearly from farmers, and I've met with quite a few, thank you to some of them that are in this room today for setting some of those up, is I have never heard a farmer tell me they want to pollute, that they want to make our rivers worse and our state parks unswimmable. What we have to do is start working with each other. And I feel like, to a certain extent, the Farm Bureau is doing that a much better job than they used to. Practical Farmers of Iowa, farmers unions, and environmental groups are starting to finally come to the table with each other to plan out what the future of Iowa looks like in terms of these type of incentives for farmers. The bottom line I have is that the vast majority of the profits from the ag industry leave our state. That's a lot of money that leaves here. That's the system that we currently have in place. And it was put into place by Democrats and Republicans. I won't pretend it's all Republicans and their big corporate greed. And I know Tom Vilsack had a big say in industrial ag in Iowa. He's a friend of mine, but I'll call him on it. And moving our dollars out of state. There's money in ag. There's ways we can tax. There's ways we can incentivize local, regional markets. There's ways we can look at new markets that are a little more eco-friendly, a little more better. My bottom line is, what impact is it going to have on our farmers? I'm not looking to run the most important industry we have out of business in our state. Our farmers, their income, their revenues they bring into our rural communities is essential. And so whatever we do, it has to include them as part of the conversation. It has to prioritize them as part of the conversation. But we do have to start getting creative. I look at what's going on in California right now. I look at all the rivers drying up because of climate change. And I see opportunity. I see the opportunity to grow new products, new commodities. But if we're going to do that, we need to, maybe through the Farm Bill, maybe through Iowa State incentives, we need to be able to provide farmers with the resources they need to start adjusting their commodities so that they can make money and start regional markets. We can start feeding our local hospitals, feeding our schools, and make a good living without having to take 2 or 3 extra jobs. It's going to take a lot of time and a lot of discussion, but we have to make it a priority in our state.
Thank you. Representative, the question again is that Iowa farmland is a valuable resource. A recent study in Successful Farming magazine showed that cover crops and terraces were extremely beneficial ways to conserve that farmland. However, these are things that cost farmers money and that many are not doing. So the current incentive for these is $15 per acre, up to 160 acres for cover crops. Where do you see improvement in this area, and how can we incentivize farmers to protect the land?
So this is a great question for a lot of reasons. Iowa is blessed with pristine natural resources, and I think it's something we'd all want to make sure we are protecting our natural resources, most importantly our water, our rivers, our lakes, our streams. I've taken a lot of active, bold positions on a lot of different issues in my 4 years. Water quality has not been one of them. I know there's a lot of criticism, sometimes constructive criticism, sometimes not so constructive, of the current nutrient reduction strategy. I know some people want it to be a lot more ambitious. Hopefully, the budgeting subcommittees would be opening to that because it seems like these programs are popular and desired by a large number of people. The biggest hang-up I've had is I think the struggle has been the proper reporting and collection of data as it relates to what are the actual impacts of various interventions. How are we able to track our water quality progress? I think that's been probably the biggest kind of concern that I've been hearing about, and it's just difficult because there's a lot of different variables depending on when and where you're taking your measurements, and obviously all sorts of other market and climate conditions. So I am happy to learn as much as I can on this issue. I believe water is very important. Again, I think the main priority going forward is going to be withstanding this gigantic financial hurricane that's been building for, depending on where you count, 10, 20, 30, 50 decades, or 5 decades, however, 10, 20, 30, 50 years. Anyway, and seriously, it is worth people considering that when we look at the rate of inflation, and again, our most difficult thing when we're going door to door, people are, hey, yeah, I want to vote in this election, but am I going to be able to afford gas to get to the polls? That's a serious conversation we're having with voters in terms of this economic stress, the inflation, which of course the mainstream media and Joe Biden said wasn't happening last year. Then all of a sudden it's here, but it's transitory. And now it's here to stay, and you're going to get used to higher prices, and we'll see how things balance out. But obviously, with all the volatility in the agriculture markets and inputs, we'll weather these challenges as we come, but I'm very much thinking the financial picture is going to dominate most of the discussion, and hopefully we can all find ways to work together to improve best practices on the farm, protecting our water quality. And I mean, I want to be able to canoe and kayak down the Des Moines River, same with Lick Creek and all the other wonderful waterways. Water, as far as human rights are concerned, I think I would place clean water on that list. So hopefully that can be a priority of the state of Iowa, and looking forward to working with everyone.
Thank you. And this will be our last question for the question and answer before we get to closing remarks. And this is concerning the economy. What are your top 3 local economic development priorities? Representative?
That's a great question. There's a lot of different ways I can answer it. A lot of things are coming to mind in terms of economic priorities. My economic priority this last summer was making sure I had enough beef in my freezer because I saw how crazy the prices were getting. And now we see the price of eggs. So my economic priority is making sure we have chickens available, that people are able to do what they can to personally empower their own economic activity. The way we value things in society is changing. I really place a lot of value on genuine human connection. Being able to come together in a space like this as a community to talk about important issues, that's something that's very valuable too. And that's what a lot of people are looking for. I think a lot of people have known this. We have an epidemic of loneliness. That's something we definitely see when we go door to door talking to voters too. People are desperate for genuine human connection. People want, with the workforce shortage, the employers that take the best care of their employees are the ones getting rewarded. People want to work at a firm in an industry that shares their values and respects them as an employee and helps them, again, accomplish their life's purpose and mission. So to boil it down to top 3, I think we've done a pretty good job on broadband, at least from what I'm hearing. And let me know if you guys have any internet hookup issues. We've been working on the IT committee for that, but I know my internet's improved considerably over the last couple of years. Certainly the tax conversation, certainly for, like I said, we have people that are still going to Florida, Texas, South Dakota because of that income tax piece. That is something we need to fix. The rising property tax rates That's a very common concern we're hearing of, hey, this is causing a lot of economic stress. Actually, I talked to someone on a retirement income. The rise in property tax alone was forcing them to reconsider moving out of the home that they invested in their whole life. I think childcare, that's obviously top of the list. Making sure that our children have every support they need and their parents have the support they need. There's a lot of economic priorities. I'd say most importantly, a certainty. People need certainty. Right now, the situation is if you're putting money in the bank and inflation's at 10%, and depending on how you calculate CPI, it could be a lot higher than that, savings is getting eaten up. People who are on a fixed income, people are feeling the squeeze. So I can't really underestimate how much it harms economic activity when at the national level, people are trying to pretend like inflation isn't happening, or they're not giving a proper explanation, which again, when you go from $20 trillion of debt to $31 trillion in debt, it's going to have an effect on an economy, and we're going to feel the pinch in a real way. So making sure, at least locally, we have as much of a predictable economic environment in which people can do the best they can in freedom to serve the needs of others and hopefully get remunerated for it. So anyway, there's a lot of economic concerns. Obviously, I'll tie everything back to the public schools, that the better job we can do in the school system, the healthier, happier individuals are going to be, the more economically productive they're going to be, and we might as well lower their taxes and do everything else we need to ensure that we have the quality of life. And Iowa's great. I think the best thing we have going for us is our wonderful quality of life at a very cost-affordable value that people in New York and California and certainly Illinois are looking for. So let's keep building strong families here. And let's keep loving ourselves. Let's keep going to church, eating together as a family. And I think we'll have a great economy.
Thank you. And candidate Heaton, again, the question is, what are your top 3 local economic development priorities?
Get to stand up again for this one because this is my passion. It's what I do for a living. When I first came back to Mount Pleasant and did fundraising as the vice president for university advancement at Iowa Wesleyan, I was shocked with just how little liquid cash was available for people to donate. We have a lot of wealth in our community. We don't have a lot of liquidity. Most of it's tied up in land, equipment, and so on. We don't have a lot of local ownership. I'm tired of listening to what the latest market forecasts are and how it's going to create a hurricane. Speaking of hyperbole, it's going to create a hurricane and all kinds of problems. I want to put our economy back in our hands. We are big enough, we are smart enough, we are perfectly capable of driving our own economy like we have for decades and for centuries here in Southeast Iowa. And there's 3 things we do that with. We do that with entrepreneurship. We train people how to start their own companies. We're not talking Elon Musk crap. Okay, high risk, high reward, high loss entrepreneurship. We're talking entrepreneurship. You want to build something, seeking a purpose. You want to build your own company. You want to grow something local, have an impact on your own community. Entrepreneurship. Number 2 is innovation. Working with the companies that are here, whether or not they're locally owned or not, and helping them stay ahead of the tech curve. Helping them think outside the box. What's coming next? What new disruptions are coming through the system? Disruptions have been around forever. There's always a disruption. The only thing certain in business is there will always be change. If you are not changing, you're dying. If you're trying to go for sustainability, you're going to fail because you got to be changing to grow, to have a successful business. That's business 101. And if we're not doing that with our companies locally and not providing that kind of training and help to be able to help them grow and think outside the box, those companies will die or they'll move. So innovation. And number 3 is tech education. We need to add programming and coding to our list of high priority vocational training. Coding boot camps. That is the disruption that came 20 years ago. And while Iowa is getting better at teaching our kids how to code, it's mostly happening in the cities. It's mostly happening through nonprofit programming, funded by our state, but it's not happening here as much and in our rural communities. We talked about needing skilled labor. A lot of the skilled laborers our manufacturing plants need right now are how to code and do script on some of that machinery. Is tech education. Entrepreneurship, innovation, and tech education. If we start taking control of our own economy here, that changes everything. When you have profits here locally, you suddenly have nonprofits that get donations. You suddenly have the rec center growing and adding a wing to it. You suddenly have a park expanding and buying property. You suddenly have new innovation and ideas in our community that help. It just spirals and accelerates innovation and quality of life. But we can't do that if we're always dependent on these national huge corporations that have no priority or interest in our communities. They're important to have here, but we need to be filling those gaps with our own entrepreneurs, our own business leaders, and our own employees right here in Southeast Iowa.
Thank you. And we just now have time for just a few minutes for closing remarks. And since we started opening remarks with you, Representative, we will start closing remarks with you, Candidate Heaton.
There's a quote by Thomas Jefferson on the Jefferson Monument in Washington, D.C. There's a statue, it's a big dome, and behind him there's 4 different quotes etched into the wall. And I'm going to butcher this a little bit, I apologize. I don't have it right in front of me. But it says something like this. It says, I do not advocate for frequent changes in laws and constitutions. But laws and constitutions, laws and institutions must go hand in hand with the development of the human mind. As the mind becomes more developed, more enlightened, as opinions and manners change, so too must our institutions progress to keep pace with the times. He simplifies it at the end of his quote, and he says, listen, abiding by the laws of our barbarous ancestors, he calls grandma and grandpa barbarians, which is a little much for me, but abiding by their laws and rules is the same as putting on the jacket that fit you when you were a boy, when you were a child. It doesn't fit anymore because we grow, we innovate, we have a different view. I have a different approach to it. I see it as every generation builds a foundation for their kids. So my parents built a foundation for me and I stepped up on it. And the next I'll build a foundation for my kids and they'll step on it. But we forget to realize is that view changes the higher it gets. And our kids see a different world out there than we saw. Our senior citizens in the room may feel like the world is changing too fast. And we don't like it. But don't forget, you see the world way differently than your grandparents did. And you push for changes, just like I'm pushing for changes to my parents' perspective, and my kids are definitely pushing changes on me. If we don't embrace those changes, our kids aren't going to stay here. As your state representative, that'll be one of the biggest filters I use when it comes to legislation. Is this going to make Fairfield, Jefferson County, Henry and Van Buren counties an attractive or less attractive place for our grandkids? It's not about us, it's about our grandkids. From their view, from how they see the world. It is clear to me, based on all our conversations tonight, that the Democratic Party is thinking that way. The Republican Party right now is scared of those changes, and they're pushing against them. So I ask for your vote on November 8th. I ask you to think about the future of our rural communities, and I thank you so much for showing up here tonight to have a place at the table.
Thank you. Representative, your closing remarks.
Well, thank you again, everyone, for coming together as a community and having this discussion. Obviously, this is just the start. There's a lot more on all of these topics. The heaviest topic that we've been dealing with has been the adolescent youth mental health crisis, which, as I mentioned before, the UN has called an iceberg. Obviously, in this community, we've uncovered some of that iceberg with catastrophes in our local community that are still very much grieving and heavy hearts. I would say protecting the innocence of our children. Our children have a lot of serious problems right now, and this has come out in the Iowa Youth Mental Health Survey that the rate of sixth graders contemplating suicide has doubled over the last 10 years. At that rate of increase, it doesn't matter how many more mental resources we can pour into the problem if the current interventions aren't getting the results we want. At this rate of increase, we are in serious, serious trouble. And no, when I'm looking, and I think it's great we quote the Founding Fathers. I think Thomas Jefferson has done wonderful things throughout the history of the world. I think it's very sad when radical woke leftists are disparaging our Founding Fathers and tearing down their statues. But Thomas Jefferson did. He wanted a public education system for this country. He founded the university system in this country because he knew that we needed to be very highly educated to sustain our liberty. And that's the system we built. And I want to create really, really high standards for ourselves and our children. I think the biggest thing our kids need to learn about in our public school right now is the Great Depression. Because even think of yourself right now. If someone asks you what caused the Great Depression, how long did it last, what was that like? Could you give an answer on that? And I would take it a step further. You know, I think a student, if you're graduating high school, you should be able to articulate the Great Depression from several different schools of economics. And if you want to articulate a Marxist interpretation, and if you can critically analyze and defend it, then thank God we have kids that are thinking and able to interact in the world and understand the world around them. I think the biggest one, we have a lot of epidemics. I can go off about technology. I can go off about the pornography culture and the hypersexualization and the things that we're seeing in schools. The graphic literature that from parents, again, are very upset about, that have no educational or scientific value, that don't belong in the classroom. So I think we adults need to do a really, really good job for our children in demonstrating what healthy, independent individuals look like that are empowered, that can exercise self-government through their elected representatives, who can have a reasonable conversation about the Dobbs decision or Roe versus Wade or Planned Parenthood versus Reynolds. That's probably one of the most difficult parts of my job, trying to explain to people how the law works. It's very complicated, and it's tough when the education system hasn't supported that knowledge to be able to debate constitutional law. So instead, we're on social media just tearing one another down and not having these honest conversations about when does a human life deserve legal protection? Is it really a good idea for our young women to be able to get chemical abortion pills through the mail? When a young kid is having a gender identity crisis, are they being given the whole picture? Are they being told the truth about, hey, this breast binding might cause irreversible damage and that these pills might not have a proven efficacy to actually solve the problem? So there's a lot of really, really serious issues. I think we need to do a good job creating the happiest, healthiest environment for our children, but it's on us as adults to say, this is health, this is illness, this is truth, this is lies, this is light, this is dark, and be as honest as possible with ourselves, with each other, and hopefully our Creator, that we can do a good job on this planet. So thank you for the opportunity to serve, and I love each and every one of you. Thank you.
Please, a round of applause for both Candidate Heaton and Representative Shipley. Thank you, gentlemen, so much.